Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of the Low-Code Cafe, episode 106. The main topic of today will be to get more into the pro code. We have many layers where the platform can be extended with reusable components. And today we'll show one of them, and it will be a continuation from last week where we showed all types of triggers in automation. And today we'll dig into how to create new types of triggers that can be reused by local developers. But before that, let me briefly introduce this event and myself for the newcomers to this event. So this is something that we are doing every Wednesday at the same time. We call it Low-Code Cafe. And what we do, we showcase new features, we showcase techniques, we hear stories from the trenches, from the support channel. And sometimes we also have special guests from our community, speaking of which, we'd love to host you if you have cool stories to share. My name is Bogdan Litescu. I'm the founder and CEO. And looking a bit at this event, you'll notice that it was recorded. And all past editions are on our YouTube channel. So 105 hours of very good training content. And now we have also a major initiative to get this content to make it more searchable, because it's already a lot of value, but also a lot of hours to find the right things. So make sure to visit, subscribe to stay up to date. Good. So the agenda for today. I see we have some product roadmap updates. I can give you a brief update on that as well. After which we'll hear from Dale Warner, our head of support, telling us about hotfixes coming, about interesting topics on the support channels. And finally, the hands-on part came to me today. And I will show a bit of how to extend the automation with new triggers as mentioned. So make sure to engage with us any way you have available. So the chat window, the Q&A, you can also raise the hand to speak. And finally, there's also the feedback form, because part of this event is for you, is for the community. So any topic that is hot for you is hot for us as well. Good. So without further ado, Dale.
All right. Hello. First, wanted to make we do have a happy birthday on the call. Mr. Bogdan is celebrating birthday today, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Dale.
Absolutely. Today in our From the Trenches segment, we have hotfixes. So far, we've released 40 hotfixes. That number sounds like a lot, but we had some security ones in the middle that touched every area of the product, and so that accounted for a lot of those. But this week we have 5. So we have 2 new features and 3 bugs that are fixed in version 1.21. So the bugs we'll talk about here a little bit, and then the features I thought I would demonstrate as part of today. So in the bugs, people who use in our form builder the agreement links, there was a bug that prevented you from adding new agreement links into the things that you must agree to or in order to satisfy that control. So that issue has been fixed. We also had in our date time picker, we have the ability to do options override. And this is a really cool feature that opens up the core tool that we're using is called Flat Picker, and it has a ton of options which we would not be able to reveal through administrative settings, just due to the volume of settings that are there. But you can, if there's something that Flat Picker offers, you can provide these in the form of some JSON that you put in the Flat Picker options override field. And so, for example, it would give you the ability to eliminate certain dates in the past or the future. There's just a ton of options in there, and we link, if you use the date time picker, we link to their documentation so that you can find those options. So if you want to do something cool with dates, that's open to you. I'm sorry, we were supporting that. Now we're supporting that, including the use of tokens. So you can dynamically, for example, pass in a list of dates that you want to allow or disallow, things like that. Behind the scenes, we have a job called Get App Builder Updates. So this looks at our systems and finds the updates that are available to you, and it runs every 5 minutes. Prior to this update, our job was logging an error every 5 minutes. It was working just fine, but logging an error. So we've resolved that. So on to features. These two new features I think are very cool. The easiest one to show off is the select all and clear all functionality for filters. This was in response to a particular customer request, but I think it's going to have value to all of you. And the other is to be able to add custom attributes for item buttons. These two, there's another feature that's kind of hidden in the middle here. This one release gets both of these things. So there's also this fixing when a filter is displayed outside of a frame, improving the user interface for that. So let's talk about these two new things. Actually, before I go on to that, we have our Campfire website, and we have these features that need to be installed. And I'm just going to go ahead and click in on our hotfixes and select the hotfixes that we want installed. Notice that these are grouped together. There's several hotfixes installed in this one. We could get partial ones if we wanted to, but we want to install all these. So I'm just going to check them all and say select and let that go process while we're working. But installing hotfixes very easy in the product. So in this system, the hotfixes have already been applied, and I had a user grid that had filtering enabled on it already. And now you'll see that we have select all, clear all, and this layout is very similar to what we had in, sorry about that, excuse me, in our form product for selection of checkboxes. So you can search for something, you can search for names, that feature has been there, but now we have select all. And so the idea about this is that perhaps we want, in our listing, we want to have everybody that has a first name selected, visible, and we want to get rid of these empty ones. So we can say select all and then get rid of the empty ones, and the listing responds appropriately. This is really cool for use cases where you want to have everything except, for example, the new users. You can uncheck a couple and to narrow down exactly what you're into. These are additive, so if we want to select all and then get rid of, for example, all the Warners, then I think I'm clicking too fast here. Let's try again. Select all and get rid of the Warners. There we go. So that feature comes up automatically when you have filtering turned on. If you, I believe the number is 5. If you have a very short list of filter options, you won't see select all, clear all, or the search. This whole area only comes up if you have a number of options. I think it's 6 or more. So just in case you're seeing that and say, hey, it doesn't work for me, it only works when you have a lot of options. Great. So that was the select all, clear all functionality. And then the other one that was asked for was to be able to use tokens with item buttons and their classes. And this is for people that want to target the buttons with JavaScript. So, for example, if we were to go to our listing here, I've got what's called user grid. If we were to add a button that was something like an item button that was like edit this. We're not actually going to provide any functionality. But on the CSS class, it now says that this field supports tokens and listing fields. So, for example, you can use details ID to add a CSS class. So we'll do that. We'll say details dash, and then it's user ID. In this case, that's the unique value that is on the row, and I want to add to every button. And so if I save that and we'll refresh, we now have buttons. But if we look at the buttons, we'll go ahead and inspect one. We'll inspect this first one here, which is associated with user ID 1. When we look at the classes for the buttons, it has details dash 1. If we were to inspect and look on the next one, it has details dash 2. So you can use, quite simply, you can use tokens as you define the CSS, and then if you use CSS in your JavaScript, you can target the button. So hopefully that will be of use to some of you. So that is the hotfixes for this week, and a little bit about how to use them. We've mentioned, we did the upgrade earlier on the Campfire website. Campfire is an event we hold on Fridays at the same hour, and we invite you to join us. That's more in a conversation style instead of a webinar style. So very interactive and a very useful one. I'll put these links on the clipboard here as I turn it over to Bogdan for the hands-on low coding, but this gives you the ability to register in advance for Campfire, to get to our recordings, to go to our community portal. So lots of useful content there. So we go on to Trigger Happy with Plintonet, and Bogdan, you have the show.
Thank you, Dale. Good. So last week we discussed a lot about various types of triggers. So just as a quick reminder, in the automation job, you can trigger business logic to happen on certain events, and they'll cover this in greater detail last time. And then the question is, of course, to create new types of triggers. As many of you know, we have many interfaces where the platform can be extended. And actually, when you install one of the add-ons, sometimes additional extensions such as this, usually additional extensions such as this get deployed. So in this particular case, I think we have a connector for the email. How is it called? Do you know, Dave?
Yeah, try the new UI. I've seen it, and it's called email sync.
Email sync, yes. Okay, I think I'm a local development instance, so probably that's why. Okay, so for example, the email sync add-on, it's doing exactly that. It's adding a new type of trigger that's trigger based on an email arriving to an inbox. And most of these add-ons would add either an action, either a new type of integration with, for example, with SMS, with Twilio, again through actions. Some will add form fields. Like the B3 would add a form field, and many things like that. So what I'm going to show today, it's a type of creating these such reusable extensions to the platform. Normally, of course, you'd be able to do everything just through low code, but with low code, you don't have the reusability. And of course, you are faced with the complexity of figuring it out and writing the custom code. Good. So the job for today, and I went a bit ahead and created a file watcher trigger. And basically what this does, it fires when a folder changes on disk. Now, I could probably do something similar by creating a Razor tokens, figuring out some C# code, but of course I would have to be a bit more a technical person, a developer to be able to do that. Whereas this can be used by anyone without having these advanced development skills. Good. So what we are going to do today is I will show you the architecture. We'll do a deep dive, show you the architecture behind this file change trigger, but also start extending it a bit, see the possibilities around it. Good. So first, I will start by showing you a bit the architecture. So here in my Visual Studio, I already have an implementation for the folder watch. It's a basic and naive implementation just to demonstrate the purpose. But this already raises a number of questions. So basically, I created it directly inside the product. So normally you would not do that, and perhaps we'll cover this in a future topic. Normally you'd create a new project, and then you'd have to link some DLLs, right? So some DLLs, meaning this will be one of them, the sharp scheduler, the automation, basically, because you need some interfaces from this DLL, right? And based on what else you'll be using, you might need our common DLL, right? So you need to add those as references. But basically, that's all you'll need to get set up. Also, another topic that we might cover in a different session is how do you deploy this. Let's say you are building a custom trigger, in our case today, and of course you want to publish it, deploy it, give it to your users. So again, this is a topic that we can cover separately, but just as an overview, you can build it as a package that can be installed. So the work involves mainly creating a manifest file, a file that says what needs to be installed, where it needs to be deployed. That's one way. Although nowadays this doesn't require that setup, right? This could be easily be integrated into an existing build pipeline, CI/CD pipeline to be deployed, right? Because ultimately, and I will show you this today, all that gets deployed to the application, it's a DLL that contains the code, and a configuration file that defines what this DLL contains, how the interface should look like. So since it's just a couple of files that need to be deployed, this is let's say open to different ways to deployment that you're already using, right? You don't need to invent something new. Good. So let's start. Let's take a step back from this code and explain you a bit the architecture first and the configuration files. So if you see in these triggers, in this trigger dropdown, you'll see that there are some categories, and this is not accidental or let's say just a grouping. It's also an implementation. Each of these triggers, which you see, they are very diverse. Some are related about the database, some are related about the application, some are related just time triggers. So they are different categories, and the reason behind it is that for each of these categories there is a class like the one that we are going to build today, that knows to handle these types of triggers, know what to do with this configuration here. This is just a configuration, but what do you do with it? It's up to that class that we call the tokens, the service, the trigger service. It's up to that class to know what to do with these settings to produce the logic that the user is aiming for. So. So there's two layers to the configuration, and the UI helps with that. So you have these trigger services, and inside each trigger service, you have different types of triggers that the service would know to handle, right? And to show you a bit of the architecture from the configuration files, I'm bringing here a listing of the config folder for the automation. Sorry. So it lives under this path, still with the old branding. You will be renamed at some point, but basically desktop module, GNN sharp scheduler config. So here is where all the wiring happens. Here is where our automation screen will know about your DLL and what to do with it. So let's start with the trigger service. So the trigger service, for each of those categories that I showed you, you'll have a file. You'd have a file here. So, for example, the database triggers are defined in this file. The database trigger service actually is defined in this file. The app events that you saw on idle, on start, begin request, so on, they are defined in this file. So if I were to open this file let me bring it from the other screen. Come on. The zoom bar is on top of the drag window. Okay. Good. So if I were to bring it here, it's just a JSON file. Let me format it as JSON. It's just a JSON file that says that this is a trigger service. It has an ID. That's how we identify this trigger service. And each trigger service should have a unique ID. Otherwise, you'd have conflicts. It has a title. And then it has a help text. And you can put anything in here. And then the magic is this string. So this, as a C# developer, you are used to this. This is basically saying from this DLL, and this will be the name of your DLL. This is the class that implements the trigger service. And this, of course, will be your own namespaces and your own class name. In my case, I created a file system JSON config. And here you see I have different ID. I call it file system. I put a title, file system events, a help text. And then this is the magic strings that tells which is the class that implements this type of triggers. Once you have the trigger service, let's say for now it's just a config file. It doesn't exist in the code, but still already you can go to this different folder, triggers, and define what triggers are in the file system service, right? So, for example, if we look again first at something existing, the app events. If we look at the start trigger, you see it's a similar config file where it has an ID, it has a title, it has a description, help text, and then here is where the magic happens. This actually app events is the ID of the service. So if we were to go to our file system trigger that you saw me adding a bit earlier on the UI, let me make this as JSON as well. So you see, I created a new config file. I just gave it an ID that should be unique. There's no other constraints. And then again, title, description, and then here under the settings, you see I told him to use the file system service. If I were to put here the app event service, of course it will probably crash, because when it calls app event, it will say, oh, I don't know this event, the file change event, or it will say, oh, I don't know these parameters, right? So this influences which class gets called with this configuration, right? So I'm calling file system. Group is just where we place it in the UI. So potentially you could have a token service that creates a few different groups in the UI. It doesn't need to be all under one group. And then everything else that you put here is specific to a service. I don't think I use this for everything. I just follow the same pattern. But we'll likely add more file triggers, so then we'll need to use something like this. Maybe we call it type, because right now I only implemented the file change, but of course you can look at the file creation, deletion as well. You can have different types of triggers. Good, and then the next important thing that creates the UI. So you saw, and let me switch back. You saw me here adding a file change trigger that has a parameter where I can select from all the folders that I have in my portal. And this happened because I defined here a parameter that is, again, it has an ID that needs to be unique between all the parameters. That's all. It has a text. It has a type. This is very important, so it could be a text box, it could be a dropdown, it could be a code editor, a text area, many different parameter types. And then this will also have a help text, what this parameter does. And finally, if I didn't do this, I would have an empty dropdown. Here I gave it a data source, and luckily we have many data sources already available in the product, so I didn't have to invent anything, just say use this data source, the folder list. And I will show you a bit of how to find these kind of things, because let's say the more advanced pro developer documentation is not consolidated yet. You'd find maybe bits and pieces of this all over the documentation. But I will show you a technique where you can easily find plenty of examples and grab bits and pieces from other places to get the job done fast. Good. So now if I were to delete this parameter, I will save. Let's refresh this. Okay, and now if I add a trigger, you see it no longer has the parameter. No? So it also, the UI is very instant. It watches these files and updates in real time as the configuration file changes. Good. So we have a trigger service. The trigger service can handle many different triggers. It's up to the trigger service to interpret these parameters and do something with it. Good. We'll get to the part where I show you more about the config file when we'll add new types of parameters, because what I have here so far, and I will show you, is just a basic implementation. Maybe we'll start adding some parameters. Good. So to explain a bit the structure of this configuration of this class, the most important piece is this one. This is the class that implements a trigger service. This is the interface for the trigger service, right? So it's a very simple interface. It has only install and uninstall. And interesting, install and uninstall, they are called every time the application starts, of course, but also when you edit a job. Because if you edit a job, we have to make sure that the triggers are up to date, so it automatically uninstalls those triggers and installs them again. What does install and uninstall means? This will be different from case to case. In my case, on install, I should start the file watcher to start the folder. On the uninstall, I should stop the file watcher, because otherwise it will continue running even though I deleted the trigger. So until the next application restart, it will continue running. And notice I don't have yet a cleanup method for it, so we should add one today. The next important bits here. These are some we implement dependency injection. So there are some services that make the job very easy for you. Of course, you could write a lot of code to do everything and figure out the wiring. But with this, if you use this dependency injection, everything will be resolved automatically for you. So these two services, the context factory will help us create the context, the execution context, to inject variables into the context. And the job executor already knows how to run a job. And basically, dependency injection, that's how it works to the constructor. So the constructor is just receiving these parameters already at the creation time, and just stores them in local variables, in these two local variables. And then it comes to the install time. So at install time, you receive an object of type TriggerInfo, which basically means the configuration that was specified here. Let me refresh to get my folder. Let's save this first. Come on, save. To get my folder drop down back. Okay. No. So it receives the trigger info, basically knows this trigger ID, its type, it knows all the parameters, it has all the information about a trigger. So basically here, I'm receiving this trigger. all the parameters that was configured. So I'm leveraging here a class from C# that already exists, file system watcher, that knows to receive a bunch of parameters to monitor a file or a folder. So basically, you give it a path, and I will come to that in a minute. You give it some other parameters. You give it the file extension. You can specify to include subdirectories, to do a deep watch, let's say. And then this piece is important. When the file is changed, it will call this function, right? So here, if I'm looking just to see what else is in here, so you have similar for created, you have similar for renamed, so when a file is renamed, you have for when a file is deleted, it should be deleted, So you have all the let's say file system operations already in here. So we'll get to that also in a bit. Going back a bit. In the TriggerInfo, I have access to the parameters. So this is the let's say the important bit here. So basically, trigger parameters give me all the parameters. I only have one, the folder, but we'll add more today. And get value gets the value of a name parameter of the folder in my case. So this is the ID basically that was here. If this was named differently, this will not bring me the right value. So it needs to match. So I'm getting the ID and I'm just computing it. I hard code it here to the root portal. With this one gives me the path of where the web application lives on my server. I append the root folder path and then the folder that I want to watch. So something simple and naive. Good. So this is the folder to watch. This is how we access parameters. Now, when this handler is called, changed, this will be called automatically by the operating system for me. It will pass me some parameters. So under the arguments, I will have the name of the file that was updated and the full path to the files that was updated. So here, notice how I use the service from the dependency injection that was provided for me to create a new context. Normally, you could create a context manually, but you have to do a lot of wiring. This service already gives me a context that is ready to be populated with something else. So a simple line that does a lot of things. And then this context, you can simply pass additional variables like you do in a dictionary, right? So you just give it any parameter, you can give it any name, and then you can give it the value that makes sense in the context. In my context, I have name and full path, and these variables will be available to use by a local developer in the job, right? So here, when this job will fire, so when this trigger fires in the actions, and I'm not sure what action it is because I don't have the SMTP. So maybe let's do a log error. Something like that. So here we can say file, and we can give it a token that let's say was a full path. Let's grab this one. It's changed. And because I'm using this trigger inserted in the context those two variables that then I can use in any action here. So if I were to save this, now I have a new job, it never ran, but I had it monitor a test folder that I have here. So this is the test folder. I just have copied this config file there. So if I were to copy it over, the system will see that the file has changed and it gave me the time when it ran. And if we were to look maybe at the logs, we should be able to see the error that we just logged somewhere. Too many other errors to find it easily.
Last week I showed turning on the debug mode. Would those show up in the debug if we turn that on?
Sure. So you mean not here in the job?
In the job, yeah. If we
Give it
turn
debug mode. Okay, and leave this to log error or change it to debug?
I don't. We can leave that. It's still logging the error, but I think if you save that and then modify your file, the next run will have those things in the debug.
Okay. And now where do I go?
History.
Oh, in the history. Okay, got it. Okay, makes sense. Yeah. Good. Yeah, so this is the context. Notice that it also tells me the trigger that fired this job, because the reason is you can have multiple triggers in a job. So you have to know which trigger. Sometimes it's useful to know which trigger caused it, and the two variables that that we created. Now, if I were to copy a new file, this job would not fire because it only watches for modified files. So there is no new record for it. If I were to override this file, that's when let's visit history again. 36. Yeah. So history. Oh, it's logging. Oh, it's logging two files. That's why. Yeah. So that's now you see the new file that has changed. Okay. Good. Actually, I see there's two of them. So the modified might also run for created for when it's first created, from what I can tell here, and the created will only run the first time a file is created. This is what these two entries suggest to me. Good. So so this is like the let's say the basic anatomy of a trigger. Of course, this code can get very complex. You'll see here that I'm not. I mean, if you are a C# developer, you'd raise an eyebrow at me now that yeah, I'm creating a file watcher, but I should dispose it in the uninstall. So I should have proper code here, and maybe I will get to that. But first, I want to show you how to create new types, how to add new parameters in our action. Because we already see the file system watcher gives us some very easy quick wins. Like we can filter by extension. So right now it monitors all the files, but maybe we want to only monitor, let's say, PDFs, right? So then, of course, we don't want to hard-code this. Maybe in some cases we want, but we want to build a more generic. We want to let the local developer configure it inside the trigger. So basically, here in the file change trigger, I will need to add a new parameter. So adding a parameter is just as simple as adding another JSON object here. And in this parameter, let's say we give it the ID extensions to allow. We give it the name. We can use the same for the title. The file extensions to watch, and this of course is no longer a select. This should be a text box, right? So it should be a text, and it doesn't need any advanced configuration. Now, how would you know these types? We have an autocomplete for it actually, but I should have opened the Visual Studio Code from the root of the portal. Then I would have had autocomplete. But I will show you a simple way to find many different examples. So in the desktop module GN# common folder, you'll find a config folder with actions. Because we reuse a lot of this logic, a lot of the architecture between various extension points, the actions will also have the parameters that they display. And with actions, we have hundreds of them, so you'd find an example for everything. It also helps, I think, knowing what you are looking for, you know. So for example, going back to the automation, you know, maybe I'm adding an action. Let's say we are using a send email action, you know, and I'm looking here and I will say, oh, I want a parameter like this, or I want a checkbox, you know, or something more fancy like a rich text, you know, or I want this type of name value collection, you know, or maybe I even want a file picker, you know. So to find any of these, you'd go to that config file, you know. So let's say we go to send email. Now, and I'm opening this in an editor, and you'll notice it's a similar structure, you know, very similar structure. So I would just grab some parameters from here, you know. So this is a text. Oh, I need a text box. I will just grab the text box. So the type is text, basically. All that I wanted to do. But since we are here, let's also do a checkbox. So you noticed in my code, I had this include subdirectory. So the watcher knows to include subdirectories as well. So that could be a checkbox. So then where do we have a checkbox? Oh, I think in the UI, let's go in the UI, you know, we have this as a checkbox. So how do you do a checkbox? I go to this config file. Oh, I just put Boolean and that's it. It's a checkbox. Right? So it's very easy to learn by example because these are all files deployed in the product. You already have them, so it's easy to browse them and find different types of using these config files to create to generate the UI. Good. So getting here, one extension is of type text, and let's also, since we are here, we'll create also the maybe we'll use the same name as include subdirectories. So we don't have to remember two things. And the title, I will just add a space, include subdirectories. To watch files in subdirectories as well. Okay. Okay, so now I have the folder, I have the include subdirectories, and I have my extension list. Good. I'm saving this, and now going back to this, maybe let me, I will not save this. I will start from scratch, and probably I will have to refresh because the config files only load at refresh time. Okay, so now you see in my config, I already have two parameters. Oh, and this is actually not a checkbox. We'll check what happened. And we also have the extension, which is a checkbox. So probably I didn't set the type. Yeah, I just left it text. It should be Boolean. Yeah. Okay, refresh, and then let's look at the edit. So now it is a checkbox. Of course, they are just on the UI. If I were to save it, and I will say, oh, that maybe I will use the extension that I already have, .config. So I'm saving this. You know, if I go back to edit, you know, the values stick, but of course my code doesn't do anything with them. So it's just a visual thing until this code makes sense of those parameters. Good. So I think let's do them both. So same technique. I will. This one it's easy. And maybe we'll also set a default. So I'm just getting the value, and here I should write the idea of the extensions. No? And that's it. Now I wire the extensions. Of course, maybe if it's empty, I should put this as the default, right? So maybe the string is null or empty, or maybe even white space. Then set it to the default. Good. The other one is very similar. Let me get rid of this thing. The other parameter, very similar, so same thing. Only you'll notice that, of course, it will complain because this one is a Boolean, it's not a string, you know? This one it's a Boolean, and this one is a string. And this is easy. We just say here it should be cast as a Boolean. And this parameter, which you see, it's a special class. It's not just a dictionary. It's a class that we implement, knows to do all these conversions behind the scenes. So it gives you a bool that is true or false. No? So that's it. Let's build. And by the way, this what I'm building goes directly to the bin folder, so I don't have to deploy a DLL manually. The config file, I edited right from the folders where they were, so I didn't have to deploy. During development, I think it's much faster if you work like this, so you don't have to deploy after every change. Good. So let's go on the UI and let's wait for it to refresh, because when you touch the bin folder, the entire application has to recycle. So that will take maybe 30 seconds or so. Good. Until that happens, oh, that was fast. Any questions in the chat, Dave?
No questions. Just a comment back from Jim about how the CSS class hotfix, he's happy to have that one. So we're happy to provide it to you, Jim.
Good.
And I was just going to start a question, and it's really kind of as a non-developer. The whole goal of what you're doing in code, you're going to end up creating a DLL. The DLL is the and those config files are the product that's going to get consumed, whether you're sharing it, whether using it on your production site or sharing it with others. That's what gets consumed. Right?
Yeah. Yep. Good. So let's see. Let's test these two new features, right? So right now we are watching the config, which is what we did until now. So if I were to copy, oh, I didn't copy it in the right folder. Let me delete it so I don't break anything else. Okay. Let's go back to the portal default 0 test. Yeah, this is my folder. So let's copy now a file, and looking at the history, we should see it here. No, that I copied it. But now, if I were to edit and change the extension, let's say we want to watch PDF. And actually, this might not work because I don't dispose the triggers, right? So the old trigger might still run, right? So I will still see a message. That's the price I pay for not covering my code.
Yeah. So could you, if you did a restart application, for example, that would force it to clear up.
Exactly. So just rebuilding this will cause a recycle.
Such is the life of the developer. When you start with that, you have a lot to do. You know, you've revealed, for example, those the file path, file extension as outputs. That would be really good stuff to have in the help text of the configuration. So an end user that's consuming this can see what they get. There's just a ton of details that have to be covered.
Yep. Good. So my last job ran 1 minute ago. So now, if I were to copy this file here, let's open the history screen again. You see there's no new entries right now because, of course, the file is a .config, right? If I do just a hack and say this is a PDF, let me go back and get inside the screen again. Now you see I have new entries, say the PDF change, you know? So looks like my parameter is working. And similar for the subfolder, you know, so right now, let me check, was it enabled? Yeah, it was. Yeah. So now if I have a subfolder here, you know, so if I go and copy something in this subfolder, of course, it's not a PDF. It will not fire, so let's just call it a PDF. So now if it worked, I should have had a new entry. It didn't seem to fire again.
It was a rename. Did that matter?
Oh, you might be right. Let's try to do it as a override. Okay. Let's try again. History. No, it's still not there. So probably something else needs to be done around that parameter.
Little debugging.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Oh, that's why. Copy pasting the wrong ID. No, so of course this string would be converted unless it's really the string true. Probably it gets converted to false. So I need this to be my parameter here. Yeah. Good. So now let's wait for it to recycle.
So we're looking really good on time. We've got about 7 minutes. If there's any questions about what Bogdan's been working on today or anything else, the Q&A or the chat, feel free to shout at us.
Yeah, so now it ran on the subfolder, yes.
Very nice.
Yeah. And probably the easy way to solve this file watcher, I mean, just having one, of course, I would have to support multiple, one for different instances of the trigger. No, but just for now to support only one type of trigger, I can create it as a variable in the class. Here I'm initializing it, and here I'm disposing it. So then I will not have this problem anymore. That's all I had to do. Of course, this probably will have to be a dictionary of records, because every time I will receive a different trigger info, and probably I will do a dictionary based on the ID of the trigger. So the trigger has an ID. I would use this to say to compute an ID. So then I know when I told to uninstall the trigger ID 7, I know which file watcher to dispose.
So I think all of this is a really great example shows all of us who are this balance between pro code and low code, those of us who are not C# programmers, you get somebody that can do this, that they're going to be very familiar with it. It's going to be easy to implement something that then a low-code engineer could use the trigger. Hey, I need to watch this folder. I want to do something. You gain all the access to all the other actions and be able to consume the outputs just by getting a pro coder to develop that for you.
Yep. Yeah, so I think I will take your advice and will say creates or exposes name and full. I
think it was file name.
Okay. It was a file name, yes. Okay. Cool. So now we have it. We have it in this description as well. Good. We have 4 minutes. I think maybe yes to outline to what Daley said. You as a user, you not do the C# code. You just get this trigger magically, and you'd be able to build your logic with it. The person, the developer, to deploy this, they would have to grab these config files. So the trigger config file, the trigger services config file, deploy it exactly in these 2 folders, because that's what our automation screen watches. This exactly 2 folder, and of course in the bin folder, you'd have your DLL. In my case, I put it directly in this automation main DLL, scheduler main DLL. So I didn't have to do an addition DLL, but just deploying this filing bin and then two config file in those specific folder will get this functionality for the users.
So now I have a personal question. Can we look forward to a file changed trigger being implemented in the product since you've demonstrated it today?
Sure. I think it's a useful, right? To have things like that, and especially I even remember projects where we did exactly that. Had a legacy system that would only know maybe to export a CSV file and put it on disk. Right, that's what all the legacy software knew to do, and we'd consume that folder, import the CSV file in the database, and then do the magic, the automation, the screens with it. Right, so that will be a very good typical example of where this will be very useful to have out of the box.
Sure, or if somebody had an FTP or any other way that they dropped a file into a folder.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the practicality of it, we saw it in real life scenarios. So yes, I think should be a trigger, a new feature in the product.
Very good. Okay. Since there's no other questions, I think we can kind of work our way out. Would you like me to find that screen and do that?
Sure.
Very good. Bogdan, I think you not only showed about triggers, but really done a great job of explaining how our structure works, just kind of in a general sense, and techniques for accessing them. So very good session today, and hopefully pro coders can use this as a good launching spot for implementing their own triggers and other extensions to the product. It really makes the product virtually unlimited, right? Keep bolting on things to the end.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you all.
Very good, and happy birthday.
Thanks.
See you all next week. Join us in Campfire on Friday if you like. See you soon.
See you.